Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. My name is Zach, otherwise known as Pulpy Syntax, and today I thought I'd wear the loudest shirt in the world and do something a little bit different. So my previous videos have been discussions about / with Miss Foodie Beauty, Miss Chantal Marie, a few other vloggers, and some individuals within the body positive community. This video will be about body positivity and will be a discussion with Virgie Tovar, who's quite an infamous member within the body positivity movement, who infamously said, if you choose to eat a smaller slice of cake, you are misogynistic. I don't know whether or not that's going to come up in this video. I certainly hope not, because it's a lot to unpack. It's a beautiful spring morning here in sunny Australia. No doubt it will get quite warm in my room shortly. Thank you also everyone who reached out and for your kind words about my eclectic color and decoration. But this video is actually a TEDx talk. I really enjoy TED Talks and TEDx talks in general. They are very useful for going to sleep unless a topic happens to come up which kind of causes a lot of thought, which is likely to happen. Less so with TEDx talks, I guess, because they're a little bit more opinion based. But we're not here really to talk about that. We're here to talk about Lose Hate, Not Weight by Virgie Tovar. So let's get into the video. This is not sped up because it's my first time doing this form of discussion / reaction with a TED Talk. And I know that there are a lot of talking points, so it'll be a pause heavy video. My apologies. But here we go.
Hi, I'm Virgie Tovar, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about how body size affects people's lives, relationships, and careers. Specifically, how being fat affects these things. People of all sizes tend to report a dissatisfaction with their bodies, but fat people tend to have less access to meaningful participation in society.
I won't argue that fact. How self-inflicted that minimized participation in society is an entirely different discussion.
Most people believe that discriminating against fat people isn't discrimination at all.
So in Australia, we talk a lot about, I told you it was be pause heavy. In Australia, we talk a lot about discrimination, like in the workplace, for instance, discrimination, like you can't actively discriminate someone against, there's like a protective list, right? So it's age, gender, religion, race, sexual orientation, and I don't know whether or not, and I think ability, so, well, like physical ability, I think. There's a list of protected terms or characteristics, basically, and I'm just coming at it from a HR perspective where it's kind of more in terms of like hiring. So you can't not hire someone based on the fact that they are a male or a female presenting, or neither. So yeah, discrimination in terms of essentially being overweight. An interesting discussion. We'll get into it.
Sometimes we don't even realize how our implicit bias affects the ways we view the world around us. For example, is it possible that you would believe me or imagine me a qualified expert if I were 250 pounds? Instead,
it would entirely depend on context, right? So if you were a 250 pound overweight individual and you were trying to teach or educate me on say, weight loss or diet, or exercise, I may have trouble believing you. Yes. If you were trying to teach me chemistry or psychology or anything along, or, you know, you were a professional in regards to, you came to fix plumbing or, you know, anything that I had no idea about, then absolutely, why would body size tell me? I believe that statement has a lot to do with in what context. If you were 250 pounds and, you know, were trying to teach me to sprint for an Olympic event, for instance, like, I probably would not be taking a lot of advice from you.
The size I am now.
Also, this is not Virgie Tovar, so this whole skit I don't get. But here she comes.
Hi. I'm Virgie Tovar.
One person got laugh. Oh, yeah, they were all real confused. They were like, who's this stand-in?
And I'm here tonight to talk to you about the ways that body size affects people's lives, relationships, and careers. In particular, how being fat affects these things.
Sure.
People of all sizes tend to report dissatisfaction with their bodies, but fat people actually have less access to meaningful participation in society.
She's repeating what
Most people believe that discrimination against fat people isn't discrimination at all. Sometimes it's difficult to...
I won't ever say that I didn't feel discriminated or not included because of my size. Yes, I absolutely did. And in the workplace in particular, it is really frustrating when you get to an unhealthy size and you kind of feel as if your career options are being more and more limited because of someone's perspective of what you are able to do. In reality, depending on... I'm just going to talk about work. Depending on the work that you're being asked to do, that may in fact be a reality. You know, no one wants to see someone in a professional capacity overexerting themselves, unable to breathe, unable to take a few flights of stairs if, you know, they're doing something like fire safety training, for instance. Or the other thing we've failed to talk about a lot is how obesity affects mental health, and things like aggression and depression and, you know, like there, from my understanding, there are elements of being unhealthy affecting your physical, not just your physicality, but your mental capability as well. So,
see how implicit bias shapes the way we see the world around us. For example, is it possible that you are less likely to believe me or imagine me as a trained professional or an expert
in what
now
context?
That you know that I'm the real Virgie Tovar?
If you were to tell me that you're a professional or expert in the, you know, psychology of obese individuals, I would probably believe you, yes. But the thing about believing people at face value is that we intrinsically don't. We don't know, like, I don't know this individual and I don't know what her professional accolades or capacity is. So this is why we have things like certificates and accreditation and awards and licenses and all of these things. Because if you rock up to my door to fix my air conditioner, like, I want to know what company you work for. Like, are you a trained professional to do this job? If you're fixing my air conditioner and you're 250 pounds, it doesn't matter. If you're working for a company that's reputable, like, yes, I will believe you. But in what context are you a trained professional? Tovar, Virgie. Damn it.
While you think about that, I want to tell you a story.
Before she gets on with the story, I actually really like this outfit. I would rock this outfit. I think I've only seen a few videos with Virgie speaking, and she always dresses quite well. She's quite fashionable, and I really appreciate that. It's a good look. I like this.
You imagine me at 4 years old. My favorite part of the day was when we got home from running errands or from preschool. I would push open the front door with both small hands, and I would take off running through the living room, through the hallway, past my bedroom, past the washer dryer that made funny sounds that I liked, and into the bathroom. I would take off all my clothes, wiggling out of my pants, nearly ripping my way out of my t-shirt like it was an inconvenient membrane. I would leave my clothes in a pile on the floor, and I would take off back towards the kitchen where my grandmother was always cooking. When I
do miss that. I mean, cooking for one and living in a house with a housemate, I really do miss family cooking. And it's a big cultural thing down here, or at least it was for older generations. It's a really big cultural thing for usually the mother or grandmother, but my dad cooks like reasonably as well. It's a really big thing for them to kind of invite the children into the kitchen, because cooking is a life skill. It is well, I mean, maybe less necessary now, but it was always pictured that when you left home, you were able to cook for yourself, and you were able to, clean up after yourself, and you were able to do things like mend a hole in clothing, and, just all of these really basic life skills that get passed down from parent to parent. So it sounds like she had a great experience growing up with her grandmother in the kitchen.
Reached the end of the hallway where the calico cat-colored rug turned into the linoleum of the hallway, rather of the dining room, I would stop. I would spread out my arms and legs as far as I could.
So I have no memories of being 4. I have memories kind of starting at 6. And my mother said that I started speaking quite late. So I think I was like 4 or 5. So must be nice to have memories this early. I wonder what that's like. I wonder why that
and
is.
I would jiggle. My thighs and belly, my cheeks would wobble, my entire body would undulate like the water in the bathtub, or like at the community pool that I love so much in the summer. My body was like that water, a source of relief and fun, a place I could jump into and feel held. It felt good.
To be naked.
It felt so good.
To be naked as a 4-year-old.
I think back on that story now, and I can barely believe that it's my own. It feels so far away. I feel protective of that little girl who could not have imagined the horrible education and body shame that was awaiting her. Less than a year later, those jiggle-filled afternoons would disappear. I would enter kindergarten, and the kids in my class would teach me the lessons that they had learned about bodies from the culture. My native relationship to my body would be stolen from me, and in its place would grow one toxic idea: your body is wrong. That idea would threaten my happiness and ultimately...
Yeah, I mean, like, kids can be great, I guess. I don't have any of my own, and my interaction with them is non-existent. But kids can absolutely be cruel. Like, absolutely. But I think the thing about kids is, like, they don't know better until they're taught better, right? So, yes. Did children hurt your feelings when you were 5? Understood. That's a thing that happened. But I'm pretty sure all of us had hurt feelings over something. I remember in our kindergarten, like, people used to get picked on for, like, the color of their hair and just, like, intrinsically super superficial things. And then, but, like, you'd pick on someone, or someone would be picked on, and then 30 minutes later you'd be out digging a hole in the sandpit together because you didn't hold a grudge when you were 5. Like, were you taught lessons when you were 5? I mean, I was, because I swore at Ernie and he told on me, and I had my mouth washed out with soap, or threatened to, until I kicked the teacher in the shin, which I learned another lesson for. But holding that with you through adulthood, like, that seems like some sort of like massive trauma that you should absolutely go and speak to someone about.
My health for the next nearly 2 decades. It turns out that my story, even the timing of the events, were part of a bigger cultural narrative. Researchers have found that very young US children show an understanding that fatness should be avoided at pretty much any cost. In fact, they asked a group of 5-year-olds if they would rather lose an arm or be fat, and they chose losing an arm.
Okay, when like anecdotes like this are thrown into talks, take everything with a grain of salt. Particularly because she's not referencing what study it is or how many children were asked, or it was just children in the US. So they literally could have gotten a class of 15 together and asked this question, and it could have been like, oh, well, 8 of you put your hand up and said being fat would be the worst thing.
I was not unlike those 5-year-olds. I too believe that I should do anything in my power to change my body because I'd been taught that people like me were ugly and inferior, that my fatness was an external manifestation of internal monstrosity.
No, but
even though I hated dieting, I did it for nearly 20 years because I believed I had to lose weight if I wanted love, success, visibility, and freedom.
I mean, who at 5 is having those thoughts? And inherently, a 5-year-old isn't choosing what they're eating. I mean, I don't think I got to really investigate my diet until after I left home, and then everything fell apart anyway because nothing I was eating was home cooked. Yeah, okay.
I believe that life would begin later. I would wear a bathing suit later. I would go on a date later. I would wear my favorite outfit. I would travel later. The history of dieting is much older than most people realize. The grandfather of modern day dieting was named Reverend Sylvester Graham. He rose to prominence in the 1800s and is now known for his namesake invention, the graham cracker. Graham believed that delicious, well-spiced foods led to lasciviousness, and that low-flavor, low-fat foods led to purity of mind and body. He started the dietary reform movement. He and his followers believed that through food, you could control morality.
See, this is all a bit interesting because the term diet, it doesn't originate from here. The term diet is to say what you are eating, and it is in reference to every other species on the planet, not just humanity. So, does this kind of sound like a shady dude who's preying on potentially the insecurities of individuals? Yes.
The same ideological basis of dieting today. Dieting was there during every formative step of my life. I was starving myself for the first time in the summer before elementary school. I was on a diet the day I graduated from high school. I had my first...
My history of dieting hasn't been this intense, but it certainly comes in waves. And when I was... In my last video, when I was back looking at my timeline photos, I could definitely see that it's kind of like a yearly or 2 yearly roller coaster for me, sadly. Hopefully this time we're just gonna stay down. Hopefully the rides come to an end. I certainly remember these things. I mean, there are key points in my memory from maybe 8, 9, 10 onwards where it kind of seemed as if my parents were more conscious about what I was eating. And my mother's a type 2, type 1 diabetic, the one where there's no insulin involved. She has to self-medicate. And she's had that since she was 19. And she only started getting bigger kind of later in life. So after me, I'm the blame. But there are certainly key moments in my past where I remember my parents being a big influence on my diet. And then as I grew older, they continued to try and have conversations with me about my diet, bless them. And I would always kind of dodge it and avoid it. And eventually they gave up, which was really quite sad.
Out of hunger-induced exhaustion when I was overseas in college for the first time. And when I got my BA in political science, I was calorie counting the meal following the ceremony.
Now, if she had come to me and said, I'm going to teach you about political communication 101, like real basic stuff, which I've taken the subject, I would be inherently interested in what she has to say on the topic because she's educated on that topic. You can make the argument that she's also educated in this body positivity community because she is surrounded by it and she lives it. However, by the sounds of it, she has never been what you may say a healthy weight. That's a whole different argument about healthy at every size, which I don't believe in. But by the sounds of it, since 5, she's always had a struggle with her weight. So all of this is being spoken on from her individual perspective of, you know, what seems like always being bigger. So, you know.
It never once occurred to me that maybe the problem wasn't me. Maybe there was something not quite right about a culture that hated me so much just because I was bigger than other people.
Okay, well, like, no. Hate is a very big word. And also, not everybody within society goes along the majority ideal of cultural mindset. We just don't. We're all individuals. You can argue that things like media and social norms have a lot of impact in terms of what we think is correct or incorrect. But yeah, this is all a big blanket statement, which I hate. And it is definitely leading to it's society's fault, not mine.
I never thought to blame fat phobia, the bigotry ideology that positions fat people as inferior. I only ever blamed...
The other thing that really gets to me is, like, being part of the LGBTQIA plus community, it's so frustrating to hear bigotry and fat phobia used in the same capacity. Because guess what? If you're gay, if you're a lesbian, if you're non-binary, if you're a person of color, if you are any of these kind of protected terminologies, it's inherent to who you are. It is part of your psychology. It is part of your spirituality. It is part of the way you were born, whatever. Can you argue the same thing about being overweight? I mean, there are arguments to say that yes, elements of your health are unchanging and unchangeable. Your diet, I would personally argue out of experience, is not one of them.
Myself.
Which is inherently what leads you to be.
It wasn't until I began researching fat in graduate school that my ideas about all of this began to change. It was 2010 and fat studies was an emerging discipline with only a handful of books and articles.
Great, then I'm not going to take the subject seriously. Because although it may be accredited, if you're telling me that fat studies only has a handful of books associated with it, unless it's based in biology, I am inherent to question a subject of that length of character.
It was in this fledgling environment that I began interviewing women who had been fat their whole lives. I wanted to understand how their body size had affected the trajectory of their lives.
Not going to interview a
I
thin
found
person?
that no matter what I asked them in interviews, the stories kept coming back to clothing, gender, alienation.
What does gender and fat have to do? I mean, I know what the answer is to that. But like, as a male, I still get fat. And I still live inside of a fat body, and I'm still a human within a fat body. So what does my gender have to do with that? I'm not going to argue that women don't have it harder. They absolutely do in so many ways, historically and in present day. But when it comes to fatness, like we're all fat. We all get fat.
One of my participants told me about what it was like growing up for her and how she always felt like she was straddling a line between boy and girl.
Okay, great.
A lot of times during playtime, little girls reenact heterosexual romances, and a lot of times the biggest girl is just chosen as the most appropriate for the boyfriend or the husband role. This is rarely discussed. It's often just understood that the biggest girl is best.
Is that a thing that little girls do? Is that like a common thing? I don't know. This kind of sounds like an anecdote. Also, like growing up, I was exposed to like both genders as a young child, and therefore didn't have this issue of like girls only or boys only.
Suited for the role. A number of my participants talked about never being able to find clothing in the girls' department, their department, and still others talked about how little boys in their school when they grew up treated them more roughly than they did their smaller girlfriends. I found that these experiences led to gender confusion.
Anecdotal, but okay.
And often in adulthood, many of my participants had much more sophisticated gender stories, and they felt that they had to perform gender more aggressively and more creatively than their smaller counterparts.
Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why this individual had these thoughts, feelings, emotions, habits? Why? Why would be
I began
afraid?
to realize that the way that I had been taught to think of fat, the way that I'd been taught to see my own body was not inevitable. It wasn't even universal. It was cultural. In no other example did this become more clear than when I began.
Because beautiful and stretched master, sexy young girls are brutally force-fed a diet up to 16,000 calories a day. That's a whole heap of calories. Whew. Damn, that's a lot of food. Well, depending on what type of food it is, but if you were eating, nutritionally dense food, that would be a lot more than 4 times that of a male bodybuilder to prepare them for marriage. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of discussion to be had about, I think, like the most common one that I know of in terms of like cultures appreciating people who are fat, people with, fuller figures. I believe it was Hawaii, and I think the reason why that that historical point of reference is so important is because it was essentially colonized or taken over by the US, which had a massive impact on their cultural image and their normality of what they were used to. I don't know a lot about it. I just know that as like an anecdote, a story. Yeah, I mean, okay, great. The problem with this is beautiful and sexy are monikers of individual preference and taste. So whether something is popular in culture or not usually has a deeper seated base than just what I find physically attractive. For instance, bigness in women in particular, from my understanding, in cultures that are not of my own, that I only know anecdotally, has a lot to do with fertility and the abilities of motherhood. And when it was interesting, I was watching something, the difference, because I wanted to get a little bit more understanding about like the difference between male and female biology when it comes to fatness, and kind of where fat goes on the body and for what reason. And a lot of it in this study I was reading, a lot of it in women had to do with fertility and protecting the ability to continue human life and to sustain that life, things like breast milk and whereas with men, the fat pockets tended to be easy access for quick bursts of energy, so things like hunting. So it is interesting what our evolutionary body has done to say, here's fat, here's energy, this is how it works. Anyway,
and reading the work of anthropologists who did ethnographies in regions of the contemporary world where women go to extreme lengths to become as fat as possible.
Sure.
Because where they live, fat rolls and stretch marks are the height of feminine beauty.
Now, again, is that beauty, like, in what reference is that beauty to? Is the beauty just to like the popular attraction, or is it a deeper discussion about something like fertility, which I would argue it would be potentially.
Sometimes women even die from consuming weight-gaining medications designed for animals.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's not
I
good.
realize that no matter what the standard, fat or thin,
but she's
women...
making kind of a circular logic argument here, saying that I'm not appreciated, or people who are bigger are discriminated against or underappreciated, but it is not a universal truth. She is making the point here that in other cultural beliefs, they have different beliefs. And yes, absolutely, they do. Culture, religion, backgrounds, like societal norms, they all have a lot of impact on what is popular, but it is only popular within that culture. There will always be people who disagree with the cultural norms.
Will go to extraordinary lengths to fulfill whatever their culture standard of beauty happens to be if they don't feel like they have a viable alternative.
Sure.
In the midst of all this, I was going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole as a scholar and as a person, and someone asked me if I'd ever heard of a conference specifically designed for fat people. Well, I hadn't, but I looked it up online, registered, and a few weeks later, I was on the BART, taking a bus to Oakland, California, where the conference was being held. I dragged my sad little navy blue suitcase, a broke grad student, through the parking lot of the hotel, and I entered the breezeway. And about halfway through, I could smell chlorine, I could hear splashing. And as I exited the breezeway, I saw something that I'd never seen before. Something I had been told did not exist. All around the pool were gorgeous fat women in amazing bathing suits. They were laughing and chatting. They were swimming and napping. They were just living without any discernible trace of the shame I'd always seen on women like them.
They absolutely do.
Women like us. And then something even more magical happened. From the edge of this tableau came a redhead. Big arms, big belly, big thighs. She was wearing a red vintage cut bathing suit covered in white polka dots and dramatic cat eye sunglasses. She did not walk, she sauntered. And trailing behind her was a boy carrying a parasol over her head so she wouldn't burn.
I mean, that's a lot to unpack. Because is she now saying she's seeing two things that she wouldn't have normally seen? Women in bathing suits, bigger women in bathing suits, and men who, what? Subjugate themselves to them? Does that matter?
Some might call this a come to Jesus moment. When I saw her, I saw the potential for my own shame-free future. In 2014,
shame when it comes to body size. Should it exist? No. Does it exist? Yes. Shame is a useful tool, unfortunately, because although it is an impression of cultural standards onto individuals, sometimes that is necessary, right? You could argue that shame and fear are tools of control, and absolutely, yes, they are. But in some ways, shame and fear can also stop you from taking your life down a path that perhaps might not be best for you. That's all.
Not long after that poolside moment.
Also, asterisks. I'm not talking about being big or being small, but I'm talking about, things like criminal activity. That's, yeah.
And I started a campaign called Lose Hate, Not Weight.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to tell people that it was not weight that needed to be shed, but rather the ideology that we aren't perfect no matter what our size. I began to solicit submissions from women. I wanted to understand women who had declared peace in their relationship on their body, women who had stopped trying to control their weight. One of the first stories I got was from a woman named Abby. Abby started to have excruciating uterine cramps in her 20s, and she tried to ignore it, but ended up at the hospital, and her doctor took one look at her, saw a fat person, and rather than examine her, told her that she simply needed to lose weight, and the pain would go away.
I mean,
even though Abby sensed that there was something more serious happening inside, she didn't feel empowered to speak back to the doctor.
Did she go for a second opinion?
And she didn't return.
Look, honestly, I have a similar story, not as important though. one of the key factors in my weight loss was in January going to see a doctor and them saying, not a regular doctor, I kind of float between them because I don't go often, but he basically took a look at me and was like, what are your problems? And I said, well, not much, I'm just here for a general checkup. He took my blood pressure and said, look, it's elevated, we can have a discussion about medication. And I said, I am in my early 30s, absolutely not am I going on blood pressure medication. I'm assuming an alternative would be weight loss. And he said, yes. And I said, okay, well, I'll do that. And then I lost 40 kilos. So if you go to a doctor and you say, well, these are the problems I'm having, and they say, well, this is an easy fix. Yes, they are a trained and I'm assuming licensed professional, and take their advice absolutely. But if you intrinsically feel like they are incorrect, or a more likely option is that you're too embarrassed to talk about the actual issues that you're having and you're trying to evade your way around it, go and find a second opinion. If you're not happy with a doctor's advice, find a second opinion or ask to see a specialist or any of those things, which you're allowed to do.
To another doctor for 3 years. And during those
3 years is also a long time to deal with this, what I'm assuming she's about to say, the same issue, and not have it treated.
There's a tumor.
Also, wouldn't it be, she's about to talk about cancer. Also, like, if your doctor says you're experiencing this pain because of the size that you are, isn't that like a really great reason to kind of investigate what you're doing with your body?
Grew inside of her, unmonitored and undetected.
Of course it did. Also,
she spent most of her 20s in treatment for cancer, and she told me that the language that she heard about cancer, that it was an invasive alien force that had taken over her body, reminded her of the way that people had talked about her fatness.
Her body.
And through making peace with cancer, she was able to make peace with her body.
Who's out here making peace with cancer? Actually, my mother last year had to have a full hysterectomy because of precancerous cells. And that was pretty, like, challenging for the family to deal with. I think she's fine now. She's had multiple tests. She's all good. And obviously nothing as serious as an actual tumor. But who's out here making peace with cancer? No. I'm of the opinion that if tomorrow I was told, you know, I was riddled with cancer and I had a 10% chance for survival, current Zach would probably fight for it, like, pretty hard. Past Zach may have just been like, no, I don't want to go through that. I'll just fade away. But making peace with cancer, I don't think is the correct turn of phrase here. Because making peace with a disease or making peace with the inevitable death that will come just seems like such a waste of your own life. And it's your life. You get to choose what you want to do with it. But yeah, I don't think making peace with... It's like, yeah, making peace with HIV, making peace with... Yeah, no, none of that works for me.
Abby is now in remission.
That, like, makes me
One of my
upset.
favorite stories came from a woman named Erin. Erin was in a terrible car accident when she was...
Back to, you can make peace with the fact that you have it, but, like, no, fight.
In college, a
Do
truck
everything you can.
came over the dividing line, hit her head on, and totaled her car. She had to be removed with the jaws of life and helicoptered to the nearest hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Even though nearly every inch of her body was covered in lacerations and bruises, her internal organs were perfectly intact.
Mm-hmm.
Her doctor told her that if she hadn't been carrying a little extra weight, she would have definitely died. She said to me, "It's pretty hard to hate your body after something like that."
Sure. How many obese people are getting into car accidents, though? Like, there's also, funnily enough, I was looking at something the other day and they said if you're carrying, is it 3 inches? If you have, like, a 3-inch It can't have been 3 feet because that's huge. I think it was 3 inches. If you have a layer of 3 inches of fat like all over your body, it can stop a bullet from penetrating important organs. That's the same type of anecdote. What are you talking about, Virgie? No. No. Because ultimately, yes, in this strange circumstance, it has protected this woman's vital organs. Okay, great. But guess what? Those vital organs are having like fat and pressure and like all the other comorbidities that come along with being overweight. So instead of potentially damaging herself in a car accident, which wasn't even her fault, it was another driver, so an outside force, she, like, by continuing to be obese, morbidly obese, super morbidly obese, whatever, you're continuing to put your health at immediate, prolonged hazard. Like, you could argue that if she just didn't drive, she wouldn't have been in the car accident at all. It's completely circumstantial.
Erin is now a well-known burlesque star in Seattle.
Okay, work. Good for you,
I want to
Erin.
leave you with one last story. And it's one that occurred recently in November. I took a group of women to Jamaica. And every single morning, we would walk out to the edge of the Caribbean Sea. We would spread out our arms and
Fun fact, down under we say Caribbean.
legs as far as we could, and we would jiggle. The experience released something inside of us, the remembrance of freedom, the remembrance and the connection to ourselves as magical, the idea.
I mean, why didn't you do it completely nude? That would have been, you know, the ideal body positive situation, I guess.
That our bodies are these incredible vehicles that take us through the most meaningful parts of our lives.
Yes, they are. And do you know what vehicles require quite often, particularly as they get older, or you get more dangerous in them? Maintenance. Maintenance is a requirement for every vehicle. And when a wheel falls off your car, you don't just continue driving it.
So I want to leave you with the sentiment that you shouldn't wait one more day, one more pound. The next time that you look in the mirror and you have the impulse to judge the body you see, or you look at another person and have the impulse to judge their body, remember that childlike sense of wonder. After all,
not everyone was a jiggly child. I'm sorry, Virgie. Not everyone lived the same experience you did. And not all of us feel it. Where was I? Not all of us feel as if societal norms are pressuring us and keeping us from living our best life. Society is, like, in my instance, society basically is yelling at me, like, you just need to be healthier. You don't need to be perfect. Like, that's fine. And that's kind of like an internal discussion as well in terms of what perfection is. But as an individual, like, you have a responsibility to yourself to be healthy. Your fatness and what happens in terms of your health, you know, it won't impact your neighbor. It'll impact you.
you have nothing to lose but your shame. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. So that was fun. And that ran a lot longer. That was a 14-minute video and I've somehow stretched it out to like 40 minutes. Jeez, I can ramble. Anyway, that was a little bit different for me. I actually really enjoyed that. And it's really quite similar to reacting to someone's vlogs. I do feel bad because I continuously interrupted the presentation of this person, but oh well, that's what happens when we have disagreements, I guess. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching the video, if you had gotten this far. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.